Hi, I'm Raquel, a truth seeker with a deep curiosity who lives to question overshared beliefs.
And I'm Christina, an interdisciplinary artist who believes in elevating undershared stories.
And we've saved you a seat at the Bombshell Brunches table.
Join us, a community who knows they were put here for more.
We chat with awe-inspiring people who live to make the world a better place in their own way, big or small.
We've got book club and product reviews and break down which tools and tactics we're using in life to help us thrive.
And let's be honest, sometimes just survive.
We'll spill the tea, set up success stories,
and leave you bite-sized takeaways that you can use to build the world you want to see.
Today we're speaking with Denise Williams. I have had such a great time on this podcast, and I think you will as well. She was the CEO of the First Nations Technology Council. She is an incredibly community-minded person. We spoke about overwhelm. We spoke about stepping into leadership positions when you didn't feel like you were meant to. We talked about owning your life, your culture, your identity. And we also really spoke about it being okay with it being okay to be alone. Sometimes it is okay to be on your own, and sometimes you can power through. And she's such a great example of that. So let's have a listen. Enjoy.
So today we have the great fortune of recording from Vancouver, BC, also known as the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Squamish, Stolo, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations, whose presence here reaches back to time immemorial. We honor their long history of caring for the land we currently work, play, and reside on, and aim to uphold and uplift the voices and values of our host nation. A quick note on why we do land acknowledgements. Land acknowledgements have been an Indigenous tradition dating back centuries as a way to show respect for the land we are on. They give an opportunity to reflect on the impacts of colonialism, reminding us to be accountable to the Indigenous peoples and to thank those who still live on and care for the land. So with that, we're welcoming Denise, our very first visual podcast. Yes!
Oh my gosh!
Oh my gosh.
Denise Williams, welcome. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
We've got one sentence introductions for people.
We're switching the script.
Exactly. And so with Denise, it's very difficult because, I mean, we have an origin story and just completely fell in love at a dinner party. And it probably only took about one or two sentences. And I was like, I love this woman. But Denise is a Coast Salish systems thinker and designer who works with values-aligned partners in philanthropic, academic, and non-profit sectors. We've been so excited to have you on the podcast. And I want you to share just as much as you feel like about your origin story, but specifically, I'd love for us to first start out with why you do what you do, which is such a big question.
A huge question. And thank you, Haichka. In our words, Haichka, thank you for allowing me to take this space with you, especially your first visual podcast, all of the incredible episodes that you've done before, just lifting up and celebrating people, celebrating women, celebrating success. I'm really, really honored. And after listening to all these episodes that you've done in the past, just congratulations, all the good work that you've done to get here. And yeah, I mean, I think how did I get here has been not a straightforward linear path at all. I think for me, a lot of what Raquel said in her land acknowledgement really informs what I do. So I grew up in a logging camp in Haida Gwaii. I moved to Vancouver Island, one of very few First Nations kids in my high school. Identify as First Nations because my dad is First Nations. We're members of the Cowichan tribes. My dad is a residential school survivor, an Indian hospital survivor. My mom is a first-generation British settler here. And I was very much raised in the 80s and 90s, feeling very alienated from my community, from my friends, from my family. I've been lonely most of my life. I've been ostracized most of my life. I've never felt like I belong anywhere. And I think when you don't feel like you belong anywhere, you sometimes come to the conclusion that you have a few decisions. I took the road of, I don't belong anywhere, so I belong everywhere. And I took the decision that for me, being a First Nations, a Coast Salish woman, but through the colonial harms of our history, of our being as First Nations peoples on this land, that I wanted to be part of the resurgence of our people, of our leadership, of our presence, of our visibility, especially as women identifying people. And I decided that the best way that I could do that work would be to give my hands to the communities, to the peoples that I wanted to understand and learn more about, because that's who I am, that's where I come from. It's also who I've been taken away from. So I decided that in my 20s, I would show up and ask how I can help, show up and ask how the way that I see the world, the way that I can perhaps navigate some of these spaces that are colonial and First Nations. I decided, maybe that's part of my calling, that I could be part of that translation effort. I could be part of that deep listening and understanding effort, that deep loving effort. I just really have set out to be all the things that maybe I didn't receive in the world. I decided to give.
It's so wonderful to hear that, especially, coming from the mixed race lens as well. I think we really connected on that front of making the decision to not be defined by one or the other, but also uphold some of the things that were, like you say, taken from and through various harms, not for us to not be able to realize. You left home really early, didn't you? Relatively.
My parents left home really early.
Okay.
Yeah, they sort of, my dad was in logging camp. My mom had left when I was around 17. So I was actually in my family home on my own. Yeah.
On your own. Mm-hmm. And so I'm curious to know, because this origin story it's so amazing to me when people are faced with adversity so young, and not for a lack of love or a lack of care, but a lack of maybe resources or abilities, for you to make a decision to go directly into community building. How did you find yourself at the same time as serving your community? Like, how did you retain, because you are such a strong personality, but you have such a community-minded ethos and aura around you. How did you retain who you are and discover who you are at the same time as discovering how you wanted to live and give back?
I think that question gives me more credit than I'm deserved.
I don't think so.
Because
I think it gives you the appropriate amount of credit.
Thank you. I love you both so much. I don't think I understood that at the time, and I don't actually think it was a very straight line between the two. To this day, sometimes I'm surprised when people might think I have a strong personality or a sense of self or a sense of self-esteem, because I don't. I think what led me on this path was ultimately just a desire to belong. So actually it's the opposite. I think that that situation with my family, parents who loved me so much but didn't know exactly what I needed, I guess, and still don't. And I think in some ways you have to love and appreciate your family for what they were able to bring to you, even if later it didn't always feel that way. And so I'm learning in my 40s how to have that kind of self-awareness, that forgiveness, that transcendence of mind. But no, when I was in my 20s, I went off to Whistler. I became an ESL teacher. I was doing all the things, in Whistler as a 20-year-old. I was going out all the time. I just kind of wanted to separate myself. I was trying to find myself. I loved music festivals. I loved dancing. I loved just trying to connect with people. Ultimately, I think that the through line, no matter what point in my life it was, the challenge for me has always been a desire to connect, a desire to belong, juxtaposed with a feeling of alienation and a lack of belonging, and always a sense of feeling that I'm not sure what I should be doing next, what's most helpful. So I found my way through life by loving people, being honest, being open, resisting nothing, and forcing nothing.
That's why when we first met, we were sitting across each other from the dinner table, and I just went, "You have so much water. There's so much water happening here."
And I was like, is this an Aquarius reference? Because that was so good.
Because
Correct. Aquarius rising, Aquarius moon, Aquarius everything.
I'm curious, how did you find your community? Like, how did you even find your way back to community? How did you find that connection piece with community?
Service. So the only way I've ever felt and still feel to this day that I can return to community or return to relationship is through service. I don't know another way. Maybe to some degree, I don't want to know another way. It is a deep-rooted belief in my Coast Salish heart that service to our people, service to this land, and service to future generations is the way that I find the others, the way that I find that through line, the way that I find purpose. So it helps me to let other things fall away, negativity, maybe places I shouldn't be, people I shouldn't be around. It helps those things fall away when you center on that purpose, that integrity, those ways of knowing, being, and seeing that you can feel in your heartbeat. It hasn't been easy. I think that in some ways I've been really confronted with questions of who's my community, especially because that belonging thing has been such a big part of my life since I can even remember being conscious. So I think in some ways I'm mad at Air Canada. I remember...
What do you mean in some ways?
Yeah. Good point.
Future sponsorship. Future sponsorship opportunity.
Future sponsor, that's
to
it.
write this.
I actually have cried 2 times really heavily in public, and both have been on Air Canada flights. One was because Air Canada decided to put that Mr. Rogers movie on air, and we all, us from the 90s, had to watch this Mr. Rogers story, Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. Yeah. It is devastatingly beautiful. And I cried the whole time, and people were like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "You put this movie on here. Like, you did this." And then the second time, and it gets to my point, is Sarah Polley's movie, Women Talking. And the premise of that film, the book, is really about women trying to navigate, what's next in these complex systems where we don't have power, we don't have agency, or do we? And so what are the questions that we ask ourselves in these moments? And for that group of women, it was do nothing, stay and fight, leave and build the new world. My question always was, which community do I belong in? Do nothing, stay and fight, leave and build a new world. And I still struggle with this question today. But I think in some ways, if you kind of look at what I did in the arc of my career, I stayed very focused in a lot of ways on the future, on innovation, on youth, on 7 generations, how my hands can lend themselves to the weaving of a new future, on the dreaming of a new way of being, because I know that I don't come from deep community roots because of residential schools. I don't speak our language. Because of the way I was raised, I don't have a place in my own Cowichan community. It doesn't mean that there's not a way for me to express what it is to be a Coast Salish woman leader. It doesn't mean that my heart doesn't beat that. And so finding the others, finding that community is a complex journey, and it's one that is difficult today and has caused immense mental health challenges for me. Because the loneliness, like, you know, being isolated, not knowing what the path is tough, but I wouldn't choose different. I think seeking community, seeking connection, seeking authentic ways of expanding what you know and what you feel and how you want to live your life is a good thing. And I'm grateful for being here, for being around new people, new communities every day. You know, I'm learning more about the fluidity of relationships and dynamics and where growth happens than I ever have. And so, you know, there's always so many silver linings to sometimes some really dark clouds, I'd say, in the seeking of community.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think there's so many people, especially within Canada, being so diverse, you know, all over the world. Like, the world is so global now, where people are from different countries, from different cultures. They're, you know, maybe their parents were the first immigrants of their family to a place, and now they've got that co-culture. And I just think that a lot of people are searching for their community or what that means to them. And like you're talking about that fluidity, I think that makes so much sense. You know, where do I fit? And maybe it's not in a box. Maybe it is more fluid. And I loved your phrase of interwoven. Like, it's a little more delicate than boxing people.
Well, it's also hard to box people in who are multiracial or multicultural. I think it is more difficult, and people have tried for a really long time. And I'm very early in my learning of Indigenous, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis culture. And there's a lot that is has been very intentional about compartmentalizing and pushing people away and pushing people out of their own culture. And coming from a colonial Hong Kong, we've had this conversation where it's not the same thing at all, but there are some similarities in the attitude towards how to erase another culture. And then how to reclaim that is a long and I think it's an endless interweaving of a future, because you can't change the past. You know, we can't not be who we are. But I think what was so fascinating to me when we first met was how graceful you were about leadership that was impressed upon you from what it sounded like from such a young age. I mean, the First Nations Technology Council, you were was it CEO, executive director, CEO at 27?
Yeah.
Can you just for a small second break that down into how that happened? Because I know what I was doing when I was 27, and I was not leading anybody. I was leading brunches, more like dim sums for 10 people. That was my win. That was my success story. So now you go.
Again, don't give me too much credit.
I will.
I was also 27, but still doing that, you know, so I made all the mistakes. I misstepped.
Well, obviously not all of them, because it still exists. You're still here.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, well, so one of the benefits of being kind of on your own at a young age is you learn to take responsibility for things. And in my case, the reality is that kids are pretty resilient. Kids from the 80s are incredibly resilient.
Yeah, we really gotta say.
So I'm a kid of the 80s where could I tell you at the time that this was a hardship for me? that I was having to make do with these things, with these circumstances. I knew I was different. I knew it was odd. It didn't feel right to me. I did feel an incredible amount of body anxiety, but my brain didn't yet know, like, what did it all mean? That turned into an anxiety panic disorder later in life, right around the same time I became the CEO of the First Nations Technology Council.
Wow.
I didn't set out to be that. I've never set out to be a leader in any organization. I really genuinely never have. I've been asked, and if I'm asked, I'm always honored. I'm always honored to try, and I'm always interested in what brings people, what brings communities to think that I might be a worthy leader in this, in whatever capacity. In the case of the First Nations Technology Council, it wasn't doing great at the time, and I had this ambition to want to do an MBA at Simon Fraser University, and it all just happened at the same time. But as the story goes, I did apply to do something else, and I did apply to also become a sommelier.
That's right.
Because I was 27. So I was like, should I just taste wine and travel the world? And I was like, I could be a food writer and a critic, and I have opinions and people are going to hear them.
Yeah. And drink wine.
Yeah. So, you know, the world was so open at that time. And so I applied to do that. I didn't get into the International Sommeliers Guild. I did get into Simon Fraser University to do an MBA. So life, you know, you have to put it out there and then you see what happens. And so
right.
I ended up doing an MBA, which also taught me a lot about drinking wine. So it was fine.
In different ways.
And then
More affordable wine, probably.
more affordable wine. But, you know, like it did for me just kind of take its own path. And I realized at that time, you know, I really understood from day one what the purpose of a First Nations Technology Council was.
You did?
Absolutely. I think when even other people didn't understand what it was meant to do, I think when government questioned what it was, I think when people thought that the idea of a First Nations Technology Council maybe didn't make sense, or it was only about getting the internet, I did. I took a pride in understanding, I think, and seeing around the edges of what the long-term benefit of a First Nations-led organization that focused on technology and innovation, not only for the sake of future generations, but to take on the case of massive digital inequity in Canada. And the more I got to learn about it, the more I learned, and the more I sat with people who told me about how it happened, what's currently going on in their communities, what the disparities mean. And this is before all of our meetings were on Zoom. This was before everything was digitally enabled. You know, this was 15 years ago.
Can you describe a little bit, just
Yeah.
for listeners who maybe don't understand or maybe aren't even from Canada, like what did the scene look like for Indigenous communities before the Technology Council, or at least before you stepped in? Because I think it already existed before you stepped in. Yeah. So before you stepped in, what did the land look like? And then maybe talk a little bit about the changes you made as well. Because I think people just don't even have like an idea of what that looks like.
Well, fair enough. And I wish I could say that over, you know, my over 10 years being there, that a lot changed. But, you know, interestingly, I think I daylit some of these issues. I don't know particularly that I changed them, but, you know, the landscape was at that time, and just to make my point, still does relatively exist. Over 75% of First Nations, of which there's 203 in British Columbia at that time, 204 today, didn't have access to high-speed connectivity. So at that time, what that meant was that they were being deemed connected at 10 megabits and 2 megabits. So that's kind of a difference of, if you imagine today, you probably have 100 or more and 50 or more download speeds. So a lot of these First Nations communities that are relatively small, relatively remote, a lot of mountains, trees, rivers all around them, make it almost impossible for these large telecommunications companies to connect them, given their requirements around return on investment to connecting some of these communities. So in my time, it was all about talking about what is high speed, how do we define it, and can I challenge telecommunications companies? Can I challenge provincial and federal governments? Can I challenge policies, regulations, and legislative pursuits that are defining connectivity in a way that I felt at that time, looking at how people were using it, as incorrect. I felt that at that time, when a lot of the business world, the corporate world, the higher education world was all relying on these technologies to really advance business, economic development, education, opportunities globally. It wasn't anyone's surprise, 15 years ago, that the writing was on the wall of where we would get to. I don't think anybody predicted what was going to happen with COVID and the acceleration of requirement to be online. But for me, it wasn't that big of a surprise. So I always kind of knew that there would be a magnitude of acceleration when it came to digital adoption, because that has always been the way that it's been. At this point, we are talking about like just radical global adoption of artificial intelligence. We're talking about the ethics around those things. We're thinking about machine learning. We're thinking about quantum technology. And these were the things kind of 15 years ago, I was thinking, let's ensure that Indigenous people have access to these technologies so that not only are we participating in digital society in the way that everybody else is, actually for me, it was always more importantly, how do we ensure Indigenous ways of knowing, being, and seeing, and the way that we hold responsibility to our ancestors, to future generations, to the humanity of these tools and these platforms that we build are being upheld and coded by the hands that are building that future. That's what I cared about. And at some point along the way, I became maybe frustrated. I think somewhere along the way of COVID and trying to build a not-for-profit and trying to switch, honestly, from being someone who's trying to sell everyone that this is a thing, that this is a problem that needs solutioning, and that Indigenous people not only deserve a place at the table, but are going to be key architects in how to ensure the most powerful tool that humanity has ever built actually does something good for future generations. I went from being a salesperson to that to, through COVID, how can your organization actually build solutions for it? And that was really difficult because the power imbalances, the way that all of this works still exist. And it was tough. So I think that that's always been a big question for me, the two that you ask, like how are you in community and how do you find community? And then how do you come to this organization and lead it through something like this? Those were two questions for me that became really, really difficult because it caused me to ask myself, am I the right person? Do I understand the vision of this? And do I have the confidence? Do I have the clarity? Do I have the ability to do this? And I think because I started when I was 27 and started to feel a little bit unstable around 37, one of the biggest challenges in those 10 years was leadership itself. Because in that leadership role, you're trying to read as much, research as much, show up as much as you can all the time. And I started to long for guidance. I started to long to be a student and not the person that has the answers. And for me, that is the eternal sort of way of being.
I think that it leads us so well into you've just so beautifully taken us down this river of all of the things we wanted to know. And there's so much more, so we'll have to have you back again. But that really dovetails into how to solve complex problems. Like, there are these complex challenges. And for so many people who are, I think, listening, who have walking in, or being shoulder tapped, being asked, being requested to step into positions of power or influence at a time of need. How do you start to solve these complex problems, and how do you prevent yourself from getting overwhelmed? What are some tangible takeaway tactics that you can be like, this is what I do, apart from
like step one
with me.
Step one.
Yeah, step one, don't panic.
We need technology. We need access.
Step one is you're going to get overwhelmed.
Yeah.
There's no way to look behind the curtain if you're doing anything in systems change work, if you're doing anything that calls your very being to show up in a leadership capacity, no matter what that means, you're going to get overwhelmed, because the reality is there are systems that sort of govern, that govern who we are, what our opportunities are, and there's ways to intervene, and there's ways to show up, and there's ways to change perception of public. There's ways to change systems. But all of that is rooted in a personal practice. And so for me, I think the number one takeaway is, one, you're going to feel overwhelmed. Two, though, build a personal practice that helps keep you grounded, that
What's
helps
yours?
you understand. Well, I'm still trying to figure it out. I mean, for me, recently, I think there's a couple things that are really beautiful about being in your 40s. And one is, I've become a lot more clear about what's good in my orbit and what isn't. Mm-hmm. And there was a part of me, because my life is so much about service, as I've been talking about, I was like, everyone, all the time, if you invite me, if you like me, if you want to be friends, I'm in. Mm. And I'm learning more that that's not the best way for me to approach not just my work, but also my legacy work around standing up for boundaries, standing up for choosing your own mental health, choosing your own body home over sort of the comfort of others. Yeah. And this has taken me a really long time, and I'm still not really knowing of that or intuitive of that right away. But I am learning that I think the personal practice for me, it kind of goes back to Raquel's land acknowledgement. The reasons we talk about whose lands these are, whose ancestral territories these are, brings me back to my understanding of who I am, why I'm here, what I'm meant to do. There are protocols and laws and ways of being here. And if there's one thing I can do to bring myself back to those ways of knowing, being, and seeing that help others learn about who we are and those laws and those protocols, those traditional ways, ancestral ways, as you raised in the land acknowledgement, that's a big part of my contribution. And so that's my daily practice. It brings me back to being a little more clear. But then there's also just those boring adulting things, like you have to learn how to take your vitamins every day, drink more water than you think you should, and actually get more cardio than you think you should. And that's what I'm trying to do. Is like, I'm like, okay, it turns out you got to do all these things so that you can do the good work.
Yeah. I'm in weightlifting time now, where like we're at this age now where you've got to lift a lot more weights. Like cardio's not enough. Cardio's not burning anything except it's helping my heart. But I need to
you have to take care of yourself at the end of the day. Yeah. It turns out to be that trite and boring.
I mean, I don't think working out is boring. I think that's I couldn't agree more. And I think it brings you into a place of having that nice, I don't know when you like to work out, but I like to work out first thing in the morning because it's that endorphin release. And it's those happy feelings, and I just accomplished something, and now the rest of the day I can handle. I think that's that's a huge piece. But I think what you're saying about community too, having your people, whether that's cultural community or whether that's, your friendship community or your family community, and having those people that you can come back to and rely on and share with and bounce ideas off of. Like Christine and I work in completely different worlds. Like, I don't know if we could have gotten any further apart in terms of what we do career-wise, but
Yeah.
I know that I can call Christine, I can bounce things off her, and vice versa, whether that's like a life bouncing or whether it's a specific career or project bouncing. And I think having those people, or like you said, having those protocols, having this understanding of a way you want to show up in the world can also be a really powerful way to move forward and kind of calm maybe a little bit of the anxiety that comes with how much there is to do.
With the responsibility too.
Yeah. And maybe I would shout out too that, you know, I'm one of the many people, honestly, I would say, I don't have those people. I mean, I think it's beautiful. I think it's amazing when people can talk about, you know, it's your relationships with your friends, your community, your family. I honestly don't have those, like even to this day. So I would say to anyone, you know, who might hear this and, you know, maybe need to hear it, not to be that cliche, but like there's a lot of us who do this work and do this work in places alone. And it's not easy, but it's totally possible. And I think that all the connections you make along the way, all the communities you find yourself thriving in and being vibrant in, it can really give you the things that you need. But it's totally possible to do without family and without community. And I think that's important. Yeah.
So how can people help if they want to help with a cause, if they feel this calling, if they want to be of service? What's their steps? What would you recommend?
The daily practice. I do think it's a really important part of the day for anyone to challenge your mental models. How do you know what you know? You know, where can you check in to see if you know what you know makes sense? And I think for a lot of North Americans, and I think for a lot of people globally who are just now hearing or have heard for a few years about reconciliation conversations that are starting to learn more about Indigenous people, First Nations people, here in Vancouver, more about Coast Salish people, because we've done such an incredible job naming places, being present, being visible, really challenging that erasure that has happened for our people in the Lower Mainland of Vancouver and across Canada, across North America, across the world. I think it's really important for people to have a daily practice where they learn about that and understand more and get into community with folks, you know, who are doing this good work. If there's anything I think that people can do is just try to learn more today than you did yesterday, which is the final sentence of my other favorite podcast, Philosophize This. Stephen West says that.
Well, that was
so. I love the little throw in of my other favorite.
This is my first favorite podcast, but that was my second favorite, and that's how he ends most of his podcasts.
I love that. Well, I was going to say that was as we have to wrap up, I wanted to ask what one thing is that is nourishing you right now. And it could be a podcast, it could be a book. I think I said to Raquel,
Could be a practice.
It could be a practice. Is there anything else you wanted to leave? If you were to give someone, or our listeners, our lovely listeners, with one action that they could take to us if they're aspiring to create meaningful change?
I think there's one for me, and there's one I hope other people do too, and that's just deep listening.
You're so good at it.
I think it's really nice and it's free and it's easy. I think it's really nice to show up in the world and just deeply listen to what somebody else has to say without trying to impose your own meaning on it or trying to guide that conversation in any way that you want it to go. There's something really magical about just sitting and listening and experiencing and witnessing someone else.
Well, it has been such an honor to listen, experience, and witness you. As always, every single time we have time together, it just absolutely fills me up. And I'm sure it did Raquel the first time you met, because I put you at the same table on purpose.
It's okay. I just stalked Denise after. Let's do more brunches.
But Denise, thank you. Thank you for being so wonderful and for being you.
Thank you. Nice to be with you.
Thank you.
Thanks for showing up, Bombshells. We'd like to thank our brilliant media and production team for their incredible work on each episode. We look so shiny because of them. As for you, my darlings, head to our website, bombshellbrunches.com, to sign up to the mailing list for future events and deals, connect with us on socials, dig into resources, and leave us little love notes. Until next time, stay focused, fierce, and fabulous.